everyone, this is the Undying Nephilim, and today I'm going to show the next faction that is being added into Hyrule Conquest. These guys took quite a long time to make, so I apologize that there's been a little bit of a longer period of time between the release of the last two factions and the next two, but as you'll see, there's a pretty good reason why these guys took so long. It's because they have tons of different units with an insane amount of animations. I think this faction alone has more animations than all of the current factions in the game put together, because almost none of their units share like animation sets. But anyway, so next up is the Moblins, and there is a lot to talk about because they play pretty dramatically different compared to all the other factions that are in the game right now. I'd say they're even a little more different than the Goomba, but anyway, like all the factions, they have 4 heroes. I will go into detail about their 4 heroes in a separate hero video, as I usually do. I guess it doesn't really matter which one I pick for this, so I'll just go with the spookiest one. So, right off the bat, things are completely different with how the Moblins start out. They have no territory and no buildings, and that is because all of the Moblin buildings can pack up into these carts and be moved around, so they are completely nomadic. So another thing about the Moblins is they don't have a civil center, so they don't have a large centralized building that trains workers and all their workers drop resources off. They have these little tiny totems that they place down and generate territory, and then they kind of sprawl out from there. Also, unlike all the other factions in the game, the Moblins don't have city phases, so kind of like if you play this game and you play the factions, there's a system kind of like in Age of Empires where you go through the ages. In this, you go through levels of a city. So you start as a village, and then you go to the town phase, and then the city phase. Moblins don't have any of that. All of their buildings and units and techs can be built and researched and trained right at the start of the game. Your only barrier is resources, which is the one thing the Moblins are not that good at. They are absolutely terrible at gathering resources compared to the other factions, because they're kind of like this chaotic horde of idiot barbarian pigs. But anyway, I'll deploy some of their buildings and I'll get started showing their stuff. I have instant build on, so their buildings will deploy instantly. But I'll get him in position here, this one down here. And I will deploy the totem. So as you can see, their totem generates a little bit of territory, and you'll have to deploy their buildings within this ring of territory. If you deploy a building outside, it'll start to fall apart and decay. So territory is still important to the Moblins. They just generate it a little bit differently than other factions. So you want to make sure the center of their packed building is within the ring before you deploy them. So an advantage of starting out with packed up buildings is if you don't like the exact location where you start out and you see like better resources a little bit away, you can move your supply thing a little bit closer to the resources so that you have better income, so they're not going all the way back to the civil center. But anyway, I have instant build and max resources on, so I don't need to worry about resources. So I'm just going to go ahead and build some Moblin things and show you some of their units, because the Moblins have some of the coolest units in the game. I'll go ahead and upgrade their totems so that they have really big territory generation. And what else? I'm going to build all of their troop training places. Alrighty, that is all their... Oh, I'll go ahead and build their wonder too. On another note, I deleted all the levers on this map, so they should not be interrupting us like they have been in the last few times I've tried to show things. But I'll go ahead and build no, I'll save their wonder for last. I'll just show their units first. So before I train their units, let me think if there's anything else about the Moblins I need to talk about. I mentioned that they're really bad at gathering resources. They have their units start out like at the same gathering rate as most of the other factions. They're just not very upgradable. So by the late game, all the other factions are able to gather way faster than the Moblin workers. Moblins also cannot gather from fruit bushes, and they can't farm. They are exclusively meat eaters, so you can only hunt or get herd animals with them. They can only harvest food from meat. One advantage though is every single Moblin unit, I think except for their Titan, can hunt animals and gather meat. So they're really good at gathering meat, despite the fact that they're terrible at gathering resources in a general sense. They're really, really good at gathering meat. And other than their technologies and buildings, most of their units, the food cost is where most of the cost of units are. So they're a very food-heavy faction, but they're able to gather meat really impressively, considering how bad everything else is. But anyway, I'm just repeating myself now. I will go ahead and show their units. So because of the nature of the Moblin tech tree or lack thereof, they can kind of like branch into different sections as far as how their armies are composed. So they have 5 different kind of branches they could plop down at the very beginning of the game. I recommend starting with the dumb Dodo camp, because that's where they actually get their workers. So most players will probably plop this down before the other 4 and just start with Dodo Blends. They have, the Dodo Blend camp, the Batty Buggo camp, the Bastion Moblin camp, the Moblin Basin camp, and the Big and Best Blend camp. And each one kind of has a sort of different, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of different sphere of units. Like the Moblins have cavalry and ranged units. The Moblins are infantry and commander units, and obviously the Big and Best Blend camp produces all of their giant, like, huge creature units and siege units. So depending on your strategy, you'll probably plop down different ones first. But I'll start with the Dodo Blends. The Dodo Blends are actually the Boko Blends from Skyward Sword. Since there's like 5 different variations of Boko Blends in the Zelda series, I decided to kind of rename the different versions of them. The true Boko Blends are actually the ones from Twilight Princess, which you can train from their totem. So I'll go ahead and do that first. So this is the normal Boko Blend. They're incredibly cheap and easy to produce units. You can start training them immediately after you place your totem. Whenever Exodarian gets to adding summoning units and stuff, the totems will actually summon just a group of them for free, so you won't actually have to train them, but that's not a feature in the engine right now. So at the moment, you can train Boko Blends from the totem, and they're incredibly cheap and easy to field huge numbers of them. They cost low population, but as you might expect, they're very, very, very weak, and they can be killed very easily. And I don't know how easy it is to tell from the recording, but you can kind of take a look at their animations. Here they have tons of animations, like the little guy stomping on the ground here. So yeah, those are the Boko Blends, the very first Moblin unit you can train. Very, very useful early in the game. You'll probably phase out of them late in the game unless you're running really low on resources, because they're kind of a trash unit. So you'll be able to produce them with, I think they only cost food. Let me check. Yeah, they only cost food. So really late in the game, you'll just be able to pump out masses of them if you're running low on other resources. But anyway, that's the Boko Blend. So the Boko Blends from Skyward Sword I have called Dodo Blends because they are probably my least favorite design for all of the Boko Blends throughout the series. I'd actually go as far to say the Boko Blends from Skyward Sword are probably my least favorite design of any enemy in the series. They are absolutely a terrible, terrible design. I think they look utterly stupid. They're actually kind of a nice little microcosm for everything about that game I dislike, but They are here in Hyrule Conquest, and they have a line of units, and they're worker units, actually, the Dodo Blend. The workers just called Dodo Blend dummies. And in the Hyrule Conquest lore, the Dodo Blends are just so utterly stupid that all the blends just boss them around. Like, by stupid I mean like not intelligent. They're barely even animal level sentient. So the Moblins just push them around and have them build their stuff and do all of their dirty work. They're incredibly easy to kill. So even as a worker unit, they're really easy to kill. If you're being harassed by raiders, you definitely want to keep an eye on them because it can be killed off pretty easily. So yeah, that's the first Moblin unit is the Dodo Blend dummy, which is their worker. And then next up is the Dodo Blend squatty, which are they got a little machete. They're kind of similar to the Boko Blend in that they're sort of a really cheap infantry unit. They're a little better than the normal Boko Blends, and they can be upgraded, which makes them stronger in the long run compared to the Boko Blends. So I do think their voices are kind of funny, though. Actually, just a quick side note, the sound effects for all of the Moblin units, or just the Blend units in general, is pretty great. I really like how most of them sound, but anyway. There's the Dodo Blend squatty. Just a really, really cheap infantry unit with the sword. You can upgrade them with shields and helmets, which I'll actually go ahead and do now. I'll just research the Better Garden tech. And there, now they got little shields and helmets, which makes them a little more resistant to pierce attacks like arrows. And they're just a little bit stronger in general with that upgrade. Anyway. After the Dodo Blend squatty is the Derpy Blend Defender, which is the Moblin from Skyward Sword. Another design that I'm not particularly fond of. It's mildly better than the Boko Blends from Skyward Sword, but it's still a little bit too goofy for my tastes. But they are kind of like the Dodo Blends. They're very unintelligent. They're really low-level units, and all the other blends just kind of boss them around. They are a spearman unit, so they're good against cavalry. They got a little shield, so they're a little bit resistant to ranged attacks, but the strength of this unit is actually garrisoning them inside structures. And I haven't decided yet, but I think they might be good at capturing enemy buildings too. So they're cheap, low-level spearman unit. They're not very bright. They're pretty durable, though, for such a cheap unit because, they got a lot of meat on them. So that is the Derpy Blend Defender. I like their little voices. And then the final Dodo Blend unit is one of my favorites. It is the Dung Flinger, which is this wonderful, wonderful catapult thing. I'll go ahead and demonstrate its attack later on, but as its name implies, the Dung Flinger flings a giant pile of crap at enemies. It doesn't really do a lot of damage, but as I'll show you later, it hits the ground, it leaves a giant pile of feces, which the smell is so horrible it slows down enemy units within its radius, and it also makes ranged units less accurate. So it's a very, very, very good support unit. It'll mess up and disrupt enemy armies if you have a bunch of them just flinging poop from behind your army. So you'll definitely want a few of these to help out your guys. So yeah, it's the Dung Flinger. I'll go ahead and show it later when I show some of the really cool abilities that the Moblins have. So yeah, that is all of the Dumb Dodo units. Next up is the Batty Wuggos. So, the Boko Blends from Breath of the Wild, I decided to call them Bug Blends because they kind of have like big buggy eyes. That's kind of why I stuck with that name. So, first up is the Bug Blend Battler, which is these little guys right here. If you played Breath of the Wild, you'll recognize them. They have more animations than any other unit in the game, even amongst the Moblins. I went just completely batshit insane with how animated these guys are. So if you take a minute when you're playing the game and you just kind of wait around for 5 minutes and zoom in on them. You'll just see them dancing around doing all kinds of crazy things. And there's even more with their other units, but I'll get to that in a second. So right now they are just kind of like a cheap sort of infantry unit with a club, but when we add battalions into the game so that units are trained in groups, the feature that they're going to have is they'll actually spawn with a randomized weapon. So when you train a battalion of these guys, some of them will have clubs, some of them will have spears, and some of them will have little bows. So they'll kind of be like this chaotic sort of blob of little tiny weak units with all kinds of different attacks. And it'll be really hard for enemies to accurately counter them because of that, because they'll have so many random advantages and disadvantages because their battalion will be composed of so many types of units. The only thing that'll be good against them is like blowing them up with fire and spells and stuff. But I don't know, I love all the little animations. And they also have completely randomized colors too, so that's pretty cool. So that is the Moblin Battler. Next up is the Baddie Ram, the Moblin Baddie Ram, which is a really, really cheap siege unit. It's a battering ram carried by a bunch of other little Moblins. It's a really early game. I mean, technically all the Moblin units are early game, but it's a very cheap siege unit, so you can usually field them pretty early and just start sending them at the enemy base and causing all kinds of havoc. If it wasn't obvious from now, that's kind of the sort of play style of the Moblins is hyper aggression. You want to get units out as soon as possible and just start rushing the enemy with all kinds of really wicked units. The Moblins have no walls. They only have one turret, so they're not defensive at all. Their buildings are incredibly fragile, so if you get sieged, Moblin buildings are very easy to destroy. You're going to want to always be on the offensive when you play as the Moblins, which is like a stark contrast to the next faction that's getting added in. But yeah, Moblins are very hyper aggressive, and that's kind of illustrated by this unit. You can train this unit pretty early in the game and just start sending masses of them at enemy bases. So yeah, that's the Moblin Baddie Ram. It's a nice little siege unit. Next up is probably my favorite unit in the game. I can't wait to show what these guys can do, but I'll have to wait till towards the end of the video. But the Moblins from Breath of the Wild, which I have called Tallblins, because quite cleverly they're very tall. So these guys are probably my favorite unit in the game right now. If you look carefully, they are carrying little Moblins in their hands, and they got this little backpack on their back with more Moblins in them. And what they do is they throw Moblins at enemies, and courtesy of Exodarian, there is a small chance that the Moblin that they throw will survive and spawn a whole new unit that you can control. I'll go ahead and demonstrate that with the Dung Flinger after I finish showing you guys all the units, because this is just the coolest unit in the game right now. It is my favorite unit. It's kind of funny because I think the Moblins are my least favorite faction in like the entire game. I'm not really a fan of like really primitive, like barbarian sort of factions in video games, but they have my favorite unit. This is just, it's just too funny. You guys have to see it, and I'll show you guys towards the end of the video. I'll go ahead and move them kind of close to some enemies so that we can get right to showing them later on. Same thing with the Dung Flinger. So yeah, those are the Tallblin Tossers. They're a really, really great unit. Can't wait to show them. Anyway, the fourth Moblin unit is actually unique to Ganon, so I won't be showing them until I get to the hero video. I can't even train them because I didn't pick Ganon. But anyway, so that's it for the Moblin units. Next up is the Moblins, which were actually, yeah, they were called Moblins in Twilight Princess. I didn't have to change their names at all. So I will go ahead and train the first Moblin unit. I guess just to preface, the Moblins probably are my favorite blends from the entire Zelda series, and I think the reason is because just it's really evident in the fight with their king in Twilight Princess. Like, the thing I like about him, and it kind of goes to show like the strengths of Twilight Princess in general, is the Moblins are shockingly intelligent for like a clearly barbaric, like primitive little orc ripoff. Like in that fight with the King Moblin, like they're trying everything to like kill Link and like rip him off Epona. Like everyone's just trying their hardest in that fight, and everyone's just kind of badass. Like I love Twilight Princess so much, and the Moblins are definitely like the best version of the Blends because they don't suffer from the same like comically stupid sort of like stereotype that all the other Blends kind of have. So I really like the Moblins, and in Neffy canon they're like that too. They're kind of secretly like the smartest of all the Blends, despite the fact that they're really small. So here's the Moblin Thugs, which is the first unit you can train from their camp. It's a kind of cheap. It's not the cheapest Moblin unit, but it's a pretty cheap infantry melee unit with a little club. And they can, when they attack enemies, they can very briefly stun, or there's a chance that they can very briefly stun them. Exodarian's working on stunning right now, so it might actually be in the game by the time I put this video up. But yeah, the Moblin Thug, a pretty nice little early game unit. If I ever play as the Moblins, I'll probably I'll usually start with the Moblin camp, and I'll train a few of these because they're my favorites. So yeah, that's the Moblin Thug. Not really a particularly special unit, other than the fact that they can stun enemies with their clubs. Next up is the Moblin Picot, which is one of the only archer units that the Moblins have. It's a very cheap. Sorry for the little hiccup there. OBS kind of freaked out a little bit. Anyway, as I was saying, Moblin Picot's a cheap early game archer unit. You can upgrade them with fire arrows, so in the late game they'll be good against buildings and sieging them. I don't know if I'd use the word siege, but yeah, Moblin Picots. I don't really have too much to say about them other than they're pretty good at burning down enemy buildings. And then third up is one of the only Moblin cavalry units, the Bulbo Riders, also from Twilight Princess. They are the Moblins riding on pigs. A pretty durable cavalry unit, not very fast for a cavalry unit, but their kind of beefiness sort of makes up for the fact that they're a little bit slow. But a cool thing about the Bulbo Riders is you can garrison pickets on their backs, so they double as a melee and an archer unit. So I'll go ahead and put these guys on right now. So as you can see, they got the little Moblin Picots riding on back, and they can shoot arrows while they're moving and kind of kite enemies, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I really like the Moblins. They're probably my favorite branch of units, other than the Moblin Tosser. Yeah, there's the Bulbo Riders. And the fourth Moblin unit is also unique to one of the Moblin heroes, so I'll go ahead and show it in the hero video. Actually, I'll go ahead and show one of their upgrades. You can upgrade the Thugs and the Riders on the Bulbos with little shields. So I'll go ahead and... Actually, I can't do that because I'm not playing as one of the heroes. Oh well, I'll show that in the hero video, I guess. So that is the Moblins. Next up is the Moblin Basin Camp. So the Moblins, these are the actual Moblins. I guess the name Moblins as a faction is a little bit misleading. They're technically a bunch of different blends. The reason they're called Moblins is because the Moblins, like, they command them all. They boss them around. They're kind of like the leader sort of species. So I'll go ahead and train some of the Moblins then. The first Moblin unit is just called the Mob, or a Moblin Mob. They are, I wouldn't say they're quite as cheap as the other Moblin units, but they're kind of designed to be a sort of cheap early game unit. They're I would say they're not very durable, but they deal quite a bit of damage. When battalions are added into the engine, they'll be a little more useful because they'll be able to replenish themselves for free as long as you have a group of them. And also, if you look carefully, there's a bunch of different variations. You got the male variations, which are the blue ones with the horns, and then the female ones, which are brown and they don't have horns. And there's also the single-eyed version, this one right here, which is kind of a hybrid with a Hinox. So there's the one-eyed variation too. So the Moblin Mob, just a cheap club-armed unit. They'll be able to scavenge weapons from dead enemies and improve their weapons, but that feature isn't in the engine yet. So right now they're not very special. They're kind of useless, but they will become a little more of a more interesting unit as more features are added into the engine, like battalions and scavenging. Alright, and then second up is the Moblin Grunt, which is probably the first not cheap, actual competent unit that the Moblins have. It's more than just cheap cannon fodder. They're probably the closest thing the Moblins have to like a professional kind of levy or just infantry soldier. They are a spear-armed infantry unit. They got armor, they got helmets. They're not total idiots like most of the Blends. So once you've got your economy going, you'll probably have most of your army made up of these guys, or at least a sizable portion of your army. They're not particularly special, other than the fact that they're not cannon fodder. So that is the Maudlin Grunt. And then thirdly is the Maudlin Warlord, which is the Moblin commander unit, which are these awesome guys with huge axes, professional armor, and a really, really cool skull helmet. Unlike most commander units, they're actually really, really powerful in combat, so they can defend themselves, unlike most commander units. They're pretty expensive for a commander unit too, so unlike most of the Moblin units, you probably won't get many of them out until at least the mid-game or late game, until they have a pretty decent economy, because they're pretty expensive. They're one of the best commander units in the game as far as like their combat potential. As far as the boosting the stats of units around them, they're not as good as like the Hylian commanders, the Ironclads, but they're still a pretty good commander unit. So yeah, that is the Moblin Warlord. And then the fourth Moblin unit is unique to one of the heroes. I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like, but I won't go into details until the hero video. I just want to show this unit because it's so cool looking. So there is the fourth Moblin unit. I'll go into more details about it in the hero video. So those are the four Moblins. Next up is all their big units. First up is the Big Blend, which is also one of my favorite Moblin units just because it's so kind of ridiculous. Just from taking a look at it, you can probably guess it's just a big, really simplistic soldier that just flings people around with its club. When knockback is added into the engine, and I'm reasonably sure it'll be in this engine in the next few days, this guy will just be able to fling tons of enemies around with its huge club. Kind of like the Moblin mobs. When scavenging is added into the engine, it will be able to scavenge corpses and stuff and improve its weapon and make its weapon better. So this guy is going to be pretty cool down the road. I mean, he's still cool now because he deals lots of damage, but he's going to be even better. I also really like his voice. Rafu. So that is the Big Blend. Next up is the Goomba. This unit I'm going to have to show in combat because he's got a really, really cool animation. So the Goomba has this giant ball and chain flail here, and it has a pretty long range, even though it's a melee unit, because it has pretty long reach because it's able to throw its ball and chain. It'll be able to stun enemies, and eventually it'll be able to stun buildings too. So that'll be pretty cool. Like if it hits a building that's training units, it'll briefly pause the unit production. So they're kind of a siege unit. Not in a sort of direct way. I would describe them as like an indirect siege unit. They're kind of a crowd control unit, and they're just pretty cool. And because of their range, if you have a group of Moblins in front of them, they can actually kind of stand behind your front lines and attack enemies over the shoulders of your unit. So that's pretty cool. So I'll go ahead and bring him down here. I'll go ahead and show his attack later on. And then the last, it's not the last, the second to last big unit that the Moblins have is the Hinox. Not the Breath of the Wild variation. The Breath of the Wild variation is one of the hero units, so you won't see it in this video. But the normal Hinox, the ones from A Link to the Past, which are still my favorite ones, are the Moblin's main siege unit. They're able to throw bombs as they could in A Link to the Past. So a group of these will just be able to blow up a bunch of enemy buildings with tons of bombs. I also really like their animations. I think they're kind of funny. So yeah, let me see. Is there any other units that I'm forgetting? I'll go ahead and show the Moblin Titan. Again, I won't go into details until the hero video. So this is the Moblin Wonder. If you could not tell, it is Ganon's castle, which is using the Temple of Time sound effects. I'll definitely need to change that. So yeah, I'll go ahead and train the Moblin Titan really quick. I won't go into details, but you can probably tell who their Titan is. He is pretty awesome. I can't wait to show him slaughtering tons of enemy units, but again, I won't show that until the hero video. But just a little sneak peek at what their Titan is. Anyway, I guess before I wrap up the video, I will show... I'm going to show the Dung Flinger first. So the Dung Flinger, as I mentioned, it throws or flings a giant pile of crap at the enemies. It's kind of inaccurate, but it's kind of like that by design. It's more of a support unit. It's not really intended to do lots of damage. Although there is a chance that it'll hit a unit, right on the head and instantly kill it. But see, it flings a giant ball of turds, which hits the ground, and it smells really bad, and it slows down enemy units around it. Anyway, there we go. Just had to show the pile of poop. And then I'll go ahead and show the Goombahs Attack, because I think it looks really cool. So I'll have him kill this one Gerudo unit here. He's a very, very slow unit. Actually, a lot of the Moblin units, especially the big ones, are really, really slow. It's kind of interesting. They have a bunch of really fast units and a bunch of really slow units. It's kind of a weird little dichotomy, but anyway. Alright. I just love the animation for the ball and chain. He's not doing too much damage because she's close into close range. Because the way this unit works, its attack is technically a ranged attack. So it's firing an invisible projectile ahead of this Gerudo, and then it's dealing splash damage. So because the unit closed the gap, it's not taking full damage from this unit's attack, which is by design. unit, it's kind of intended that you have a bunch of your other soldiers in front of it, and it kind of attacks from over their shoulders. So if these guys get ganged up on, they can kind of get massacred. You'll kind of want to keep them at a slight distance. They're not very good by themselves, so they're kind of like a support unit in a way, despite the fact that they're so high damaged. But yeah, that's why he didn't kill that Gerudo particularly fast, because his attack was literally going over the Gerudo, and it was only being dealt damage from the splash damage. Anyway, now I get to show my favorite, not only my favorite Moblin unit, but my favorite just unit in the game currently. And I can't think of a unit that I'm going to add for any other faction that I'll like more. These guys are just perfect. And a big thank you to Exodarian for getting them to work. So, as I said earlier, what these units do is they grab a little Moblin and they throw them at the enemy. And there is a small chance that the Moblin will survive the throw. It'll spawn into a new Moblin, and it'll continue to run around and attack enemies. You can research upgrades that improve the survival rate, which I will actually go ahead and do so that we have more of a chance to see more Moblin spawning. So go ahead and research the upgrade that improves the odds of the projectile surviving. So let us go ahead and attack all of these Gerudo with my Moblin tossers. I love these guys. They're so funny. And they're funny in an actual funny way, not like a trying too hard, dumb sort of way. They're just perfect. That's one compliment I'll give Breath of the Wild is I liked the Moblins and the Moblins in it. As you can see, one of them survived the throw. Only one of them survived. Oh, there's another one. Like the corpses of the ones that didn't survive. Looks like we got quite a few of them now. So awesome. Oh, looks like that one back there is about to die. Quite a few of them now. When I first tested out these units, the little Moblins that they spawn at 100% chance to survive, so they were just spawning just like dozens and dozens of little Moblins with each attack. Yeah, that one survived. That one right there did not survive. He's just kind of like stuck in the ground from the throw. Definitely not overpowered like when I first tried them out. Anyway, that's my favorite unit in the game. I just love how they throw little Moblins and there's a chance for them to survive. As probably the best application of this unit is almost like a siege unit. If you're going against a faction that has walls, you'll be able to throw little Moblins over the walls and get past their defenses, so that's pretty handy. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and train like a ton of them and see how many Moblins they can spawn. Alright, that's quite a lot. Let's up the speed and I'll get them over there. Back to normal speed. And we'll just have all of you guys bombard the Gerudo with flying Moblins. As you can tell, they also have randomized colors too, although it looks like most of them spawned as the red ones. It's so great. Dung Flingers joining in the attack. Literally throwing everything at the enemy. So we got 4 little Moblins out of that. That's just so great. It's so great. I love the Dung Flinger too. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it for the Moblins. I guess I'll go ahead and show all their buildings packing up and moving. Their Wonder can't pack up and move, but all of the Moblin buildings can pack up and move, which I'll go ahead and demonstrate right now. I'll go ahead and move their base around. Okay, cool. I have instant build on, so they all pack up instantly. So yeah, there we go. All the Moblin buildings are all packed up, and kind of move them around and move your base wherever the heck you want. Their packed up buildings are pretty slow, although they have some upgrades that can make them faster, which is pretty cool. So I'll just move their base down here just to kind of demonstrate. As you can probably gather from the fact that their bases are mobile, there's a lot of pretty crazy aggressive strategies you could pull off with the Moblins. Like, you can pack up your entire base, like just move it right outside of the enemy's territory, and then just start churning out units right at their base. So there's a lot of offensive applications for their mobile bases, which are going to be awesome. I think it really suits their aggressive playstyle pretty well. So I'll just unpack their base here. Then move these around so that they can all kind of deploy. And there we go. I moved the Moblin base a whopping 100 feet from where it used to be. So, yeah, that's the Moblins. Let me think if there's anything else of theirs that I didn't show, but I think I pretty much showed all of their unique stuff. I went ahead and showed their Titan. I showed my favorite unit, which, let's check up on them. We have a pretty big army of Moblins now. Looks like about 9 Moblins survived. I just love that. They just throw the little Moblins. Oh, it's so great. Alright, anyway, I'll stop getting distracted by that. I know I've said it in like almost every video I've made, but yeah, none of that was possible in Medieval 2. The switch to this engine has just been the best thing ever for this game. But anyway, I think that is it. I showed all their units. I'll show their hero units in the hero video. I showed their mobile bases. I think that's it. If for some reason I forgot to show anything that is unique to the Moblins, I'll mention it in the next video. But yep, that's it for the Moblins. Hopefully you guys like the look of this faction. They're my personal least favorite, you know, aesthetically, and I'm not a particularly hyper aggressive player, so even their kind of play style isn't my favorite. But they have a lot of really awesome things that I do like. Like I love these guys here. They're my favorite unit. I really like some of their heroes, and some of their hero units are awesome. This particular hero unit, which I'll show later, is really cool. Their Titan is awesome, especially like the animations for his attacks. They have one of my favorite Titans. And I just kind of like how funny the Moblins are. Their buildings all have really funny names. All of the descriptions for the units are written as if a Moblin was talking, so they have really crazy descriptions for units. In parentheses, I have sort of more normal descriptions of units to help players understand what the heck each unit are, so they aren't completely confused by the Moblin blabber. But the Moblins are pretty cool. Even though they're my least favorite, they're only my least favorite because I like so many other factions more. They're cool in their own ways. So next up is going to be what I think will be the faction that'll start bringing in a lot of people. The next faction that I'm adding in is the Dark Nuts. They are incredibly popular. They are really, really popular in the Total War version of the game. Everyone seems to freaking love the Dark Nuts. They're up next, and if you love the Dark Nuts, I think you will like them in this game because they are going to have so many awesome abilities that, as I've said before, were not possible in Medieval 2. They'll have a unit where instead of dying, like chunks of their armor fall off, so you have to slowly like break apart like pieces of the Dark Knight's armor before you could kill the unit, kind of like in the actual games. Most of the Dark Knight units will be able to gain experience points and level up like heroes, which is really awesome. I won't spoil too many of the Dark Knight stuff. I'll save it for the actual video. So hopefully you guys like the look of the Moblins. If you're a patron, you can go ahead and download them and test them out now for yourself. There's a few little... It's really rough around the edges, though, just a heads up. So don't expect them to be extremely polished until the public release. If you want to become a patron, you can click on the little link in the video description and become a patron. Every little dollar helps. And yeah, that is the Moblins, and it's my favorite unit so far. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed listening, and stay tuned for the next video.